Yeah, how's it going? This is Intangible. Just wanted to make a quick prediction about an upcoming fight this weekend. And the fight I'd say I'm looking forward to most, because I think it could pose for some very interesting exchanges and a very good developmental fight for a young fighter. Now, this weekend overall, I just want to add as a bit of a side note, is pretty bleak. Conlon versus Wood is a good fight. The undercard of that fight certainly took a big hit with Kid Galahad versus Jorge Castaneda, coming off, and Gary Cully versus Miguel Vasquez is really the only moderately redeeming part of that undercard. And then you have Mark Leach versus Chris Bork, which is an interesting main event domestically, and the undercard is just, it is so fucking terrible. It is horrendous. Look, if you're suicidal and want to just pull the plug, looking at that undercard will convince you that this world should be no more. But nevertheless, aside from my apocalyptic boxing, let's just get into a very good fight. A fight between a prospect coming through the ranks out of Mexico, 27-0 with 25 knockouts, no draws. Miguel Madueno fighting against Panamanian former world champion Jezreel Corrales. Jezreel Corrales is someone who's vastly more experienced, and surprisingly is coming into this fight the favorite. You can actually get up to plus 200 on Miguel Madueno to win the fight. Now, Corrales has vastly the more experience and is fighting in his home country of Panama. You gotta give Madueno credit for traveling away from home, having traveled away from home, including this fight, in his two biggest fights. Nevertheless, Corrales is someone who's certainly a bit shop-worn. Now, going through his career, it's been a bit of a tumultuous tale. He's definitely had some good wins. Now, previous to his world title reign, where he defeated Uchiyama twice in his backyard in Japan, he also holds wins against Rene Alvarado, who was eventually a WBA regular champion. He also picked up a win against Robinson Castellanos and has fights against Chris Colbert and Memphis Miller, for example. So definitely the more proven guy overall. But in totality, in regards to recent results, they're certainly not as impressive as Madueno's, and certainly not as outstanding. Madueno is definitely much less proven and has been fighting largely domestically in Mexico against lower-level opposition on Thompson boxing cards against certain caliber journeymen, where he was blowing through them, and I really had no idea what to make of him because of the fact that his opposition was just so many steps behind him. Nevertheless, he stepped in the ring and on Triller below the event of Fat Joe versus Ja Rule, where he fought against Sonny Fredrickson, who's been a pretty active and well-capable gatekeeper over the past several years. Very durable and can box and brawl a little bit. A very good test at that point in Madueno's career, and he certainly didn't have it all his own way in that fight. In the early rounds, he was seeming to get all the way, just pretty much the better of the action, was largely dominating most of the exchanges. Managed to hurt and stun Fredrickson numerous times and actually dropped him in the early rounds. But Fredrickson would immediately come right back in the middle rounds, landing big shots and catching him on the way in during exchanges. Madueno is someone who tends to be a bit reckless on entry. He's someone who does use fundamentals. He's not necessarily an explosive puncher in the same way that Angel Fierro is, but He is someone who likes to load up on punches. And he does fire a lot of shots from different arcing angles. And so that allowed for Fredrickson to land good straight punches, uppercuts, things of that nature up close near the inside as Madueno was stepping in. And he seemed to be wearing down a bit from his overexertion, but nevertheless, he started to pick up a second win in the later rounds. The pace seemed to get to Fredrickson, and he managed to stop him in the 10th round to score what is, to this point, the best win of his career. Since then, he's had a couple of fights on more domestic cards, but so far as a professional, he's looked relatively impressive to me. I won't say he's looked like a world-class fighter, but it won't take necessarily a world-class fighter to beat Jezreel Corrales at this point, luckily for him. Corrales, in his prime, was a decent pocket, back foot, and front foot fighter, could use all different methodologies in regards to how he would approach his opponents. He was quite dangerous in regards to his overhand left. While in his prime he was a bit athletic and also possessed the dexterity to be able to garner power in his punches, even while extending very large amounts, trying to get torque into his shots. He had big power in his overhand left, tended to hold a low lead right hand, trying to catch opponents with a counter jab on the way in, trying to probe opponents with a jab to set up his overhand on the way in. He did show boxing ability too, managing to outbox Alberto Machado before eventually getting stopped. But now he's definitely past his prime. He's made clinch work definitely a more viable and eccentric point in his style. He started to use the clinch work to try to smother pressure opponents, which is, I think, definitely what he's going to be trying to use here. I think Corrales is going to be approaching this fight with a more active jab. He's going to be trying to commit to that shot more, looking to score. He's going to be looking to straighten out his left hand. He's going to be throwing the left hand with less torque, and he's going to be trying to straighten out the punch, looking to catch Madueno on the way in. Now, one thing about Madueno is his chin isn't necessarily proven, and Corrales can punch to an extent. So that is a concern I might have for Madueno in this fight. But with him, I think he's the physically stronger guy. He weighs more on fight night, and he's very big and stocky for his division. He's pretty bulky as well. He's somewhat well-defined in regards to muscle. So I think if Corrales tries to engage in a clinch battle or work in clinches with him, I think Madueno is going to have the better of those exchanges. I think at long range, Corrales is going to have success, especially early on, with how he's going to be able to land some good left hands, good shots down the middle. He's going to be able to pick off Madueno on the way in. But I also think Madueno's longer arms. I think the way he arcs his punches, I think the sort of awkwardness he possesses, I think is going to make himself a bit of an unpredictable offensive combination for Corrales to attempt to decode. I think at this point in Corrales' career, with how he lacks a bit of size at the division, how his athleticism has started to deplete, as a result, pretty much the rest of his game, I think Madueno is ultimately going to possess a bit too much strength, volume, and overall physical tenacity for him to be able to deal with. And I think Corrales is going to be stopped in the second half of the fight. And I think if you're a bettor, you should consider betting on Madueno to win the fight straight up. And if you want to get a bit risky, round 6 through 10. Now, Corrales is someone who has never had great punch resistance, having been dropped by Robinson Castellanos, dropped by Chris Colbert. He was stopped by Alberto Machado too. He was dropped actually in his last fight in Panama against a domestic level opponent in Jesus Bravo. He managed to outbox Bravo the rest of the fight and win comfortably on points, but still managed to get floored in that fight. And it certainly showed signs of waning physically. And I think his deterrence is ultimately going to cost him in this fight against the younger, fresher fighter in Madueno. But Madueno, I will say, if he doesn't have necessarily adequate punch resistance, this could be a bit of a difficult task for him, especially if Corrales is able to get his timing down early on. Could he blow Corrales out early? It's possible, considering he is a bit of a quick starter. He does like to come out immediately aggressive. He's not a particularly cerebral fighter. He doesn't fight using a lot of subtleties, you know. He's someone who's very straight up and down, has very specific and clear intentions when he gets into the ring to try to maul and beat down opponents. I think he'll do that in this fight. I think he'll pull it off late. I think my overall evaluation of him as a fighter right now is not world class, but someone who, depending on the style he gets into the ring with, could pose for an interesting contender at lightweight at this point. So, let me know what you all think if you all have an opinion. I'm out.